NVIDIA's RTX 3080 is turning 6 years old in 2026. Despite the Bitcoin mining boom making these things near impossible to find, most people actually retained a pleasant view of the 30 series. They had great performance leaps over the last generations, more VRAM, sometimes, if you want to spend $1,500 on a 3090 for whatever reason. DLSS improvements, and finally, products that can handle 4K gaming. Do you remember when we used to just sit there and say that the new flagship could handle 4K? Fun times. We really thought the 1080 Ti was a 4K graphics card. 6 years is a long time, and developers stopped caring about game optimization even longer ago. So, does that mean that the 3080 just can't keep up?
No.
The 3080 was built on NVIDIA's Ampere architecture with 10GB of blazing fast GDDR6X VRAM on the original models before NVIDIA decided to make a middle child to the 3080 family. This random inclusion had 12GB and was just about as fast as the 3080's older brother, the 3080 Ti. Unfortunately for most people, it kind of came at the end of the life of the 30 series, and it's not nearly as common as the 10GB 3080. It's also usually about the same price as the 3080 Ti, which makes it entirely unjustifiable unless you can manage to find it much lower. You can find yourself a used 3080 10GB for around the $330 mark. This means its closest price competition in the current generation of lineups between AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA is AMD's 9060 XT, which goes for a little more than $350 despite the MSRP being at $350. The 9060 XT comes with more VRAM and all the perks of a brand new graphics card, such as not having to clean it out and not using a million bajillion watts. Thanks, NVIDIA. But it can't perform like the 3080 can, meaning competitive gamers looking for higher frames and low settings should still go for the 3080, as the lower VRAM is not going to be a problem even in 1440p. I'm not going to sit here and yap about VRAM for 20 minutes like most people do, because in my experience running low on VRAM doesn't suck as long as you're on DDR5. I recently found my favorite game, Escape from Tarkov, was sending over 6GB of textures to my RAM since my poor 3080 didn't have enough VRAM. Whoops. I didn't even notice. To recap, in this specific comparison, the RTX 3080 has better performance, but a higher power draw, less VRAM, and worse upscaling. Or does it have worse upscaling? The 3080 can take advantage of NVIDIA's brand new DLSS 4.5, but since it is a 30 series GPU, you're not going to get the same performance benefits that you will out of a 40 or 50 series GPU. It's still going to be better than native, and it's going to look just about as good as native in most games, but you'll lose a little bit of performance in comparison to a 50 or 40 series GPU uplift. From my experience using the 3080, I don't like the way that its DLSS model works. I think it looks pretty bad, especially on foliage in a lot of games. There's a lot of kind of weird shadow problems. It's almost like the trees are clipping into each other sometimes, and I really don't like that, especially in games with a lot of bushes that people like to hide in. You kind of have to find them through it. So I would still recommend using DLSS 4.5 once it's more of a broader thing, especially if you're on a 3080 or a 3090 that's not going to miss, 5 or 10 frames because it just so happened to not be a 40 series card. Starting off with some benchmarks, we're going to be rocking the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, which is the third best gaming processor, 32GB of DDR5 6000, obviously our 10GB RTX 3080, and all of the games are installed on a blazing fast Samsung 990 EVO 2TB NVMe. Our system expectedly crushed Fortnite's OG game mode, where we hit our 240 frame cap without problems. I didn't use upscaling on this game, and we're playing on about medium to high settings overall. I didn't crank everything to ultra because I would personally rather see how much compromising of image quality I would have to do in my game settings to achieve the high frame rates that my monitor can display, than sit there and watch a GPU struggle on ultra just to get 120 or 110 FPS. And I know most people would rather have that extra performance to trade off a little bit of image quality. So usually here we're going to look for a nice little balance to get high frames and good image quality. Moving on to something more recent, we got around 140 FPS in Marble Rifles. This time around using some higher graphic settings. We're using DLSS native, which I believe is just using it for anti-aliasing and not upscaling, meaning it shouldn't have given us any extra performance. Solid numbers, but if you lower some settings, you can get closer to 160, and if you want to use frame generation, you can get a little at 200. Escape from Tarkov is a really weird one. I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. In our benches, we're playing on high with TAA, no upscaling. And while we get great performance for this game standards, really good numbers, after upgrading my GPU to the 16GB 5070 Ti, I noticed Tarkov was using 16GB of VRAM. All of the VRAM of my brand new card, 6 extra gigabytes of GDDR7 VRAM. I figured the VRAM was cutting it close on the 3080, but in reality it was well over maxed out. Despite this, I never noticed any game freezing or GPU artifacting or anything. Rainbow Six Siege used to be one of my favorite games, and it's a game with pretty wacky performance. I found on my normal settings I needed almost fully low settings or upscaling just to get to 240 frames consistently. Different maps ran anywhere from 5 to 80 frames better or worse in either direction, which really isn't something you want to see in a game, especially not a competitive shooter. Because of that discrepancy, I went ahead and just threw everything to Absolute Ultra and used the game's benchmarking system to determine performance. By the end of it, we can see that VRAM usage was pretty low, and we managed pretty impressive performance for a game on Absolute Ultra without ever dipping under 100 frames. That's definitely a W. I threw Raft in there just for funsies and cranked up the settings to max on this one. I recorded the benchmark using NVIDIA's recording software, and for some reason it saved at a really weird resolution. Minecraft does the exact same thing. Thankfully, this doesn't affect the game's performance at all, so these numbers are still completely accurate. On Absolute Ultra, we see less than desirable performance for the image picture. I was really hoping for more from this GPU on this game, since it really doesn't look good. Of course it has its art style, which is charming and all, but at a glance it shouldn't be something that tanks GPU performance, especially like we see here. This is likely just optimization and not the fault of the 3080, but if developers aren't going to optimize their titles, the graphics card's the only thing that's going to be able to handle it. To finish up the benchmarking section, I went ahead and threw in the lesser known Naraka Blade Point. My best friend got obsessed with this game, and she forces me to play this game with her literally all the time now. I've noticed it's really similar to Marble Rivals in the sense that it is shockingly GPU reliant. We're using DLSS quality and medium to high settings, yet we're still seeing a little bit of age in the 3080's name. Thankfully, in this game we're not seeing any VRAM issues, and it never stutters or has any noticeable frame drops. 3080 runs this game pretty consistently, even if a little bit more performance is desired. In my book, it's just another win for the 3080's value. For something that outperforms the 5060 Ti at 70% of the cost, it's provided great value to me in my time daily driving it, and I would absolutely recommend buying one in 2026. My specific Tough OC model sticks in the 70 degrees Celsius range at around 320 watts of power, though sometimes you'll find it in the mid to high 70s or at 330 and even 340 watts of power under a really big load. The 3080 appears to only really be held back by its VRAM and those poorly optimized games, meaning it could be a 1080p monster, especially since VRAM demand will be a little bit lower on 1080p. If you're someone who's looking for high settings and high performance on 1080p without breaking the bank, this blasts every new generation card out of the water in terms of value, and from what I can see, every past generation as well. Taking the step up to 1440p, this is a dominant card for competitive shooters and a perfect high performance option for those who are okay with tweaking some settings. If you don't mess with settings, even on some of those harder to run titles, there's really nothing that will push the 3080 below that 60 FPS margin that most people try to make. Your estimated performance should be somewhere closer to 100 FPS on the lower end, in other words 100 FPS on the more demanding titles at higher settings, and 265 FPS on the really optimized titles, or more. I get like 600 frames in Valorant, but that's Valorant. I really wouldn't recommend the 3080 for 4K gaming. I personally believe it's worth spending more money on something with more VRAM and some faster speeds. but for literally every other audience, the 3080 seems like the absolute meta graphics card on the used marketplace. Its older brother, the 3080 Ti, usually hovers around the $400 mark and is a solid step up if you're looking for something with a bit more horsepower than the 3080 and a little bit more VRAM as well. Just keep in mind that the 30 series specifically has a rather high power draw, so you'll have to factor that in with the rest of your build. In my personal ideal build, I would pair the 3080 with as low as Ryzen 5 5600 or Core i5 12400F, and as high as the 7600 X3D. Though personally, with the current pricings, I would actually recommend an Intel CPU over AMD. That's one of the only times you'd ever do it. The Core i5 14600KF is priced around $220 and outperforms AMD's current generation budget option, that being the 9600X. I specifically recommend this CPU because it's compatible with both DDR5 and DDR4 RAM, which is an incredible asset during the RAM apocalypse. The other good thing about this Intel CPU is that it has really cheap motherboards to pair, and they're pretty high quality too. To recap, the 3080 is really good in 2026. It provides some of, if not the best value for its price in its price range. The only time I can think of that I wouldn't recommend you using this is if you're playing on 4K on demanding titles. But if you're going to be playing on a 4K monitor with demanding titles, you probably shouldn't be looking for a graphics card that's 6 years old anyways. Your mindset should be closer to the current generation of 9070 XTs or 5070 Ti's or maybe even a 5080 or 5090. And for literally everybody else, 3080 is pretty good.
If I took your